Hi, the concept of ecological niche is a very old one, though only formalized scientifically early in the 20th century. It is the idea that each species has a place in nature that accounts for the features that makes it unique. For Grinnell in 1917, niche was defined by habitat, but soon after Elton saw niche defined by a combination of physical, chemical, and biological characteristics that enabled a species to thrive. Hutchinson, in the late 1950s, quantified the niche as a hypervolume of niche space defined by intervals along all the key distinguishing physical, chemical, and biological axes. So, an example of a niche is if you have different axes here. And so along different of those axes, you have representing the niche space. So each of these axes is one component of the niche. As I was saying, one dimension such as biology, chemical, physiology, and all that niche space represents the space in which the species resides. So Hutchinson distinguished the fundamental niche mainly based on chemical and physical conditions, allowing survival and reproduction from the realized niche. So if you have to distinguish what we call in the niche the fundamental niche, which is all the possible space that the species can occupy, from the realized niche that is always smaller. And that's because the species doesn't encounter all the different conditions. Okay, so the niche space actually occupied that also reflected the biological factors that generally narrowed the conditions in which it could compete, survive, and reproduce successfully. This is the realized niche. The static view of species plugged into niches was consistent with the prevailing equilibrium view of the ecological dynamics, heavily influenced by the equilibrium outcome of Locta-Volterra competition. And this is a graph taken from your chapter 13. With environmental variation and spatial heterogeneity ignored, competitors tend towards equilibrium abundances and coexistence, or inferior competitors are eliminated and the winner reaches its carrying capacity. If niches of two species were too similar, coexistence will become impossible under the competitive exclusion principle. Complete competitors cannot coexist. So as you can see on that graph here, if you take the graph on the far left, the species 1 win because the population reaches the carrying capacity, and it occurs in all cases. That's the species 1, that means the species 1 outcompete the species 2. In the second case, the B, it's the opposite. Species 2 outcompetes species 1. In the case C, one or the other can win, but it's not stable. It means that one will overcome competitively the other one. Whereas the only case when you have coexistence of species, it's in a really particular case, right? And we'll talk about that in a minute. That's case D. So much theoretical effort went into determining limiting similarity, how similar species niches could be while still allowing for coexistence, the case D here. So if you look at one single axis, and we call that axis body size. And here we can just have the abundances of species. Right? Then, if you plot each species one by one, some species will be here, some species will be there, some species will overlap more, right? So when there is a single axis like body size, linked to food specialization, for example, along which closely related species are arrayed, these ideas seem to fit some special cases, such as Darwin finches on the Galapagos Island, The concept of character displacement was proposed as an evolutionary mechanism for separating species along niche axes via selection in both or two similar species for types that differed more from those of the other species to minimize competition and thus reducing similarity. However appealing, these ideas have proved difficult to demonstrate empirically. So what we talk about similarities here is the spaces in between those different peaks, right? You can see that species 1 and 2 aren't really similar. They kind of specialize along that axis of body size on different sizes. And then they would be able to live together in the same environment as in case T, whereas species 2 and 3, being really close from each other in terms of body size, might need to compete with each other, and that will lead in one of the three cases A to C on your graph here, right? So that's the whole idea of similarities along one axis. In recent years, as environmental variability and the frequency and role of disturbances have become well documented, the static niche concept has played a smaller role in ecological theory, but some more dynamic ecological phenomena may be replacing the classic niche-based thinking. One key example is invasive species, in which primarily anthropogenetic processes move species into new regions, where they may arrive with special advantages, such as a few natural enemies, or they may bring diseases to which the native species have no immunity. The processes of introduction, establishment, and spread are under active study because of so many invasions in progress with strong repercussions for native species and communities. What are the characteristics of the invasives relative to the natives? What creates the advantage? These are the questions that link to niche-based thinking. Ecosystem engineers are species that alter the physical and chemical environment in ways that may allow some new species to persist while eliminating others. An example of ecosystem engineering is the beavers. Beavers, with their well-known dam-building skills, had transformed the landscape and biota in North America before fur trappers arrived, right? So you can see in this graph, the existence of a dam in A leads to a complete change of the ecosystem from a one-channel river to a multitude of freshwater wetlands, right? And that's all due to the engineering of a beaver building that dam, slowing down the flow of water, building that wetland. Another example of ecosystem engineering is crayfish. Crayfish dig burrows occupied by frogs and insects and increase the turbidity of water, reducing the light penetration in streams, hence making growth difficult for primary producers in streams such as algae and plants. Last example of ecosystem engineering, the elephants. Elephants remove trees and help preserve grass dominance over woodland in savanna habitats. The population dynamics of the engineers can create and maintain an entire ecosystem dynamic as a result of their activities. A somewhat related idea is niche construction. In the case of the elephant here, you can see that by clearing the trees from the environment, it prevents the closing up of the environment. So it maintains an open savanna instead of having a woodland. Niche construction, in which many organisms create a more favorable environment for themselves and other species, sometimes based on structures or behavior that span generations. However, in the case of niche construction, the evolutionary consequences of the constructions are taken into account. So let's take an example, the niche construction of these leaf cutter ants. The leaf cutter ants that farm on fungi are termites with huge multi-generational mounds, as you can see in that graph. Those mounds achieve a relatively constant ideal temperature, and they fit the pattern of niche construction. The view here is that species, to a considerable extent, create their own niches through an array of interactions with their own species, with other species, and with the physical chemical environment. This is a much more nuanced view of nature than simply plugging species in niche space, right? Niche construction links to concepts of eco-evolutionary dynamics, with ecology and evolution going on simultaneously. That we will hear about more soon. See you in class.